Hello and welcome to the Power of Perspective podcast. I'm Jess Ridout, Head of Data and Digital Consulting at BAE Systems Digital Intelligence. As someone who works within the tech industry, not only is it important to keep up with emerging trends for our clients, but it's also just quite interesting, especially when something as prevalent as AI comes along and I'm having to explain to my dad. I've brought along friend and colleague Adrian Peachey, Director of IM&T at BAE Systems Digital Intelligence. Adrian has a wealth of experience, but mainly and probably most importantly for a conversation like this, he just has a curiosity for technology and typically someone I regularly tap up for opinions. This session will reflect on lessons learned from emerging technologies such as AI and how we can apply those technologies to things that are still emerging like quantum. Not often do we get an opportunity to reflect and look back, so we thought today would be a good opportunity to do that. We'll discuss how organisations can set themselves up for success, whether that be through monitoring tech developments, academic partnerships, or something else. Adrian, welcome.
Thanks, Jess. It's awesome to be here on the podcast and get a chance to talk about artificial intelligence and quantum, things that, quite literally are dominating the headline, both for us personally, but also professionally as well. I'm really interested to hear how you describe it to your parents, though.
Well, to be fair, I'm actually probably doing them a bit of disservice because about 25 years ago, my dad, a dairy farmer, was one of the first dairy farmers to bring in robotic milking machines to the UK. And that was actually one of the factors that made me think about wanting to go into a career in technology. So maybe they would have more of an understanding than I'm giving them credit for. How would you describe it to your parents?
With mixed results, I would say. So we do a lot of the fun kind of, is it AI or not type conversation. So, smartwatch, smart cars, all those types of things. Are they AI or not? Usually the answer is yes, and we'll get to why in a sec. But there's some scary bits to this as well. So I think with deepfakes in particular, my parents are pretty convinced by some of them, which is a little bit concerning. And I think we would see those as, especially ones appearing on Instagram, social media, relatively unsophisticated. But they're still, asking me, is this real? It doesn't feel real. The context feels wrong, but it looks real.
Yeah.
So it's fun, but it actually increasingly is a bit scary.
Yeah. We do have conversations about TV programs like The Capture and Sleeper Train and how realistic or close to reality are those. So,
yeah, Black Mirror's done a brilliant job of exposing a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, we digress.
Yep.
Adrian, when we talk about new or emerging technology, we do often talk about AI, even though it's actually been around for quite a long time.
Yeah.
I guess that's because it's become more into the public domain and awareness. What are your thoughts on that? And where are organisations within their AI journey?
It's a really interesting one. And I think part of it is because people's definition of AI differs massively. So I think it's really important. Actually, I've got a really nice one here that I can talk you through from the Alan Turing Institute. So ATI say that AI is the design and study of machines that can perform tasks that were previously required human or other biological and brain power to accomplish, which is pretty cool. They continue to reference the fact AI is a broad field and then it incorporates many different aspects of intelligence. So you've got reasoning, making decisions, learning from mistakes, pretty big one, communicating, solving problems, and even the way we move or interact in the physical world. And they finish by recognizing that AI was founded as an academic discipline in the 50s, right? Which I really like. And it's fast becoming a critical component of everyday applications. Well, it's hard to kind of disagree with most of that, right? And it's a really holistic definition. I love that it calls out that AI has been making an impact for a while, and the fact that they, although it's not been as prominent in public consciousness, it's been here with us since the 50s. And a quick walk through history, we can see lots of examples of that. So in the 60s, we had Eliza, the chatbot, which at the time was pretty dramatic, and people were blown away. They were interacting with a computer. For those that are interested, you can still get access to Eliza. There's emulators of her that you can go and interact with. So we'll share a link so that anyone that's interested in the podcast can go and see that. Then there are expert systems in the 80s like Cadet. So Cadet was a clinical decision support tool for detecting the sort of early signs of cancer. And that's still in use today. That deep knowledge they collected from experts is still relevant. In the 90s, IBM created Deep Blue. Deep Blue was incredible because it was able to defeat chess grandmaster, which, kind of unheard of. At the time, humans believed that was the peak of intelligence. If you could be the best at chess, that's where intelligence was. And there we go. We wiped the floor with them with a bit of software. How disappointing. the noughties were interesting. I think for me it feels, and this maybe is a little bit more personal than based on fact, but it feels like to me it was a real acceleration in AI. I remember seeing Honda's Asimo robot sprint across the stage. It was so smooth and elegant. And I'd been playing with robots and they were awful. They were cool. They were, they weren't smooth, right? They would fall off the table, they'd barely stand up. And there was a robot running, no wires, no support, no one holding its hand. I just thought that was absolutely transformational to me. Then, of course, you get things like Roomba, the autonomous vacuum cleaner. Technology is interesting aside, but do you remember the meme of the cat? So the cat and the shark.
One of the originals, yeah.
One of the originals. It's an Internet Hall of Famer. For those of you that don't know what that is, I recommend you go and find it. And then, if we close out the noughties with things like Google's self-driving car project, again, we're starting to see that baked into everyday products now. Yeah. What about the 2010s?
Yeah, so I think that's where it starts to become more into public awareness, whether people realise this or not. We've got, the iPhones with Siri and virtual assistants and virtual assistants. And then from a personal perspective, I had a Nintendo Wii, so I would be playing snowboarding on my balance board when I couldn't get into the mountains.
That's very cool. Yeah, it's a bit easier to try and do it in your living room than it is to always get out to the Alps. I remember playing with Xbox Connect and the fact it could, it was able to track your body. It's in 3D. Just incredible. I mean, most people use it for bowling, right? But still pretty cool. And if it takes us to the kind of where we are today, and using ATI's own definition, and as our parents kind of recognize, it is everywhere. It is absolutely everywhere. And to make that real, you pick up your phone today or any modern camera, it's got eye tracking. That's pretty good. But it'll also recognize the people in the photo. It recognizes animals and other objects. We've got, the biometrics we use to access so many of our devices now. The two that we're holding here, face unlock, whether we use it to pay for things. It is, it's fast becoming ubiquitous in the way we operate. But also grammar checking, spam filters, even shopping recommendations. Granted, they're not always very good, but they are all supported and powered by AI. So, the reality is that is a nice little run through history of bits and pieces that we would consider to be artificial intelligence. But for many, when they talk about AI today, they're not talking about machine learning, rule-based or expert systems, are they?
No, I think, they're talking about generative AI or Gen AI.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember when that started to come into prevalence with the release of ChatGPT, November 2022. At the time, I was kind of aware of it, but it was really came into much more into my consciousness when I went to the Gartner Data and Analytics Conference in May 2023, when it was in every presentation, every other slide, talking about ChatGPT, generative AI. And I was just thinking, goodness, this is something that cannot be ignored. I need to get with the program and start exploring this. So personally, for me, that's when I started to use it, planning out weekends when I hadn't had enough time to research a city or whatever, summarizing documents and things like that. So basically, to enhance productivity.
Yeah, also, you're absolutely right. And it is really difficult to ignore. I mean, I think we were talking earlier about even using it for policy documents, to the public, government documents. They're vast, right? To summarize it quickly, it's just so powerful.
Absolutely.
Again, I remember I was one of the first to actually register for ChatGPT and use it. I remember how transformational that was. And I think for many, it's felt like magic. And you kind of go, well, why not, right? It's hard or almost impossible to explain what's going on, almost by design. Some of these services are black box or they're opaque at best, so it's really difficult. The results are absolutely rapid, almost instantaneous, faster than anything that you typically will access. And then the results feel miraculous. They're very good. They feel intelligent. So you get it. I can see it comes as a little surprise where leaders all over the world are looking at this and going, how do I bake this into our world, into our enterprise? And you did actually ask a really good question, though, which I've just completely ignored, which is where our organization's at on their kind of respective AI journeys. And we do a fantastic job of being political here. And it will sound like I'm dodging the question, but it's mixed, right? They're all over the shop. The key thing is that they're all interested in it, right? So for me, I find it easy to talk about AI adoption in sort of two camps. The first is how, and second is what. So how is where we can use AI to improve how we operate, right? So that might be supporting finance with identifying where there's duplicate or erroneous transactions. It might even be helping facilities start to plan out or more effectively simulate and model loads within buildings, so they can understand energy requirements and seatings and room structures, etc. Then if you move on to the what is the value that we deliver to others, right? So it tends to be the products and services we offer to customers and partners, and that could be within our products. So where we're using AI to power our intelligent lead assessment service. So ILAS is being used in law enforcement to more effectively identify people at risk, right? So then you can more easily prioritize investigation efforts as well as any necessary interdictions. But it could also be within the services we offer. So for example, we provision lots of engineering teams into Hightrust environments. Using generative AI could be a means to kind of supercharge their capability, right? So deliver this more value for the same kind of customer investment. So more efficient engineering teams in high trust environments is something that I'm very passionate about. And using that approach of how and what, we see organizations like Coca-Cola, for example, they're using AI to optimize their digital marketing campaigns. So marketers will tell you they struggle. They have very finite budgets. Those budgets are usually always being trimmed. So you have to do quite a lot with them. But attributing the benefit, as in the return on sale, to marketing is really tricky. Okay, so using AI to improve that approach to create a more efficient A/B testing method that actually is happening all the time and always tuning and tweaking based on active feedback. Now, those are the sorts of things AI are powering, so they can make better use of a finite budget. But we're doing the same thing. We're also looking at how we operate. And as part of the future, the factory of the future, and some of the work that we do in our other sectors, we're using AI to try and predict where we might have manufacturing faults. Okay, so if you imagine that whenever there's a failure anywhere in that production, it could take us out for hours, and obviously the knock-on effect to what we provide to our customers could be massive. So predicting that, going in, doing the restorative measures ahead of time is massive for us. So yeah, I mean, we've talked about quite a few already, but the what's are varied and vast. So we're seeing more appear every day. I don't know how recently you've been playing with Google, probably less so now using ChatGPT all the time. But if you still go to Google, which now feels like an old school technology, and you type in your query, the first thing you get back is a generated summary. So it tries to answer without you actually going and accessing any of the ranked listings. So the ranked listings are still there, but they're kind of pushed down the page. Now, given the way they manage or have historically managed or generated their revenue was on kind of ad campaigns, right? Pay-per-click AdWords. It is interesting to see how this is going to disrupt even their own, revenue model, because they're trying to remain current in a market that's calling out for generative AI, which defeats their AdWord model. So it's interesting to see how it's disrupting all sorts of markets. But again, we actually had a generative AI component. I'm very proud to say we had a generative AI component in one of our products ahead of Google releasing their search summary. So within our cyber threat intelligence portal, we use generative AI to summarize all the different decades worth of threat intelligence reports so that cyber professionals within our customer organizations can go and ask a question in natural language and get a really nice, thorough response in return. But for that trust and transparency, it then links to the various different human-created reports. So AI-enabled search, natural language, nice and seamless, but with a trusted result at the end.
That's a really good point, because you're touching now on our own adoption journey for AI. And I think organisationally, we're maybe in a slightly unique position, because we have some areas within the organisation who have been developing and using AI for a number of years. If we look at the autonomous Land Rover in the early 2000s, not one that my dad was using, but maybe a little bit more specialised.
It was like a Dakar rally like vehicle.
Indeed. And then in the 2010s, we were working with Cranfield University on the National Flying Laboratory Centre to develop Astra.
Yes.
The autonomous aircraft, and was the first uncrewed flight in British airspace.
Yeah.
And then most recently, the Pacific 24 RIB, which was the first uncrewed vessel to receive Lloyd Register's unmanned marine systems certification.
Yep. Incredible. And I think, and it just shows that, BAE Systems, as I said, sort of we were talking about earlier, that long history of AI, BAE Systems have been there that whole time. And, so those are the sort of more traditional assets that I suppose much of the organization is famed for. But within digital intelligence, we're not known for providing intelligence solutions in secure high trust environments, right? So with the term Hightrust comes caution. And I think this has slowed, but not stopped us by any means progressing AI in some parts of the business. So when you're asking about our own journey, again, it's mixed. One of the things that is really worth calling out there, Jess, is that I'm really proud of the legwork, the effort that we're going to make sure that any AI capability that we look to adopt, both for ourselves internally, but for our customers as well, is risk assessed. Considering against a variety of factors like transparency, explainability, ethics, and of course, trustworthiness. So I mentioned earlier, generative AI, it feels like magic and it's opaque. It's very difficult for us to get into the detail behind exactly how the decisions are made. As a result, explainability can be really difficult. Whilst that will limit its adoption in certain use cases, and that's fine, it doesn't mean that we're not considering it all across the patch. We're thinking about it everywhere to transform how we operate and the things we provide. So we're using it to look at how we author documents more effectively, review documents, as you said, to summarize content, of which there's lots, but also we're looking at how we might write code. Yeah. And I think it's those sorts of factors that can lead into differences in adoption, particularly ethics, how that affects people's speed of application of the technology. So if I make this a little bit more real, so if we take our generative AI coding assistant, which we will use to help the generation of code within our software development teams, again, to produce our own products as well as deployed into our customers' environments. There are a plethora of solutions out in the market today. Just like you said at your Gartner conference, every stand had generative AI in it. Well, the generative AI just dedicated product space is grown exponentially. And you can look at some of the market research reports on this. It's like that. So if you want to go and select, so for this particular use case, you want to go and select the generative AI coding assistant, what do? Well, naturally an organization would go, I want the best one. It has to be the fastest, probably want it to be cheap or at least affordable. I want it really easy to deploy, blah, all the usual functional and non-functional requirements. Fine. The problem with doing that is that if you're favoring functionality and price over some other kind of key considerations, like ethics, okay? So without naming names, because that's not what this is about, but there are some generative AI coding assistants that, their models have been trained on data that's been scraped from every corner of the web, with and without permission, okay? And the risk of using those solutions is that users would be unwillingly, potentially incorporating copyrighted, IP protected code into their code bases and for their customers as well.
Yeah.
We're not willing to take any chances on that, right?
No.
So we're spending a lot of time to thoroughly understand that, looking at each model, how it was trained, the permissions around any licenses that we consume, or even going a step further, we're looking at actual code attribution. So we're really, it's belts and braces for us.
Yeah, interesting. And what are the other common blockers or sticking points that you're hearing about?
It's a good question. There are quite a few. What I'll say, though, is that some of them aren't really unique to AI. So, one of the ways that you manage as a business, you can manage emerging technology effectively is by being a more agile organization, right? I don't know, agile gets used all the time, but I mean, it's like how easily you can adapt and flex to changes, whether that's in the market with your customer or indeed with technology. So the ways that I would suggest we do this, and we have been doing, is through regularly scanning the market. Right, so don't just be comfortable with what you know today. Always be looking at what's turning up, what's going on, as you say, at those Gartner conferences that we're hearing from different market research organizations. What are we hearing from our customers, or even just other podcasts? Right, there's plenty of good content out there, so you can scan the market. And you need a robust continuous improvement process. You can't always be a heavy change program to affect enterprise change. It has to be means and ways to go for this particular process. We're going to look at it. We're going to make these tweaks, and actually, this particular product fits. So we need to be doing that. You need data-driven decision making. Again, and this is close to your heart and data. It feels so obvious to be saying this, but it is massive. So, as simple as if you want to get investment to look at one of these technologies, you need to be able to show the benefits. It's much easier to do that when you've got data around how long it costs, how much time is wasted in between processes and handling times, that kind of cycle time of core processes. And the final thing is just prioritizing the right initiatives. There's going to be loads of really exciting stuff out there. And you could just get lost in a mire of hopper candidates and not knowing which one to progress. I know we've talked about that before. So yeah, to make this real for what we're doing at the moment, we're continually assessing the wonderful wider technology, as you know. Mm-hmm. Personally, very interested in it, so that makes life a little bit easier. And, you've seen the types of material that we're pushing out to our people so they can learn about this. The podcast is a good example of us trying to do that. But we have teams actively trialing these things as well. We have low TRL capability, that's technology readiness level capability within our DL Labs team. So always looking at new investigations. We've run 150 plus experiments over the years in AI, right? We're always looking at ways of solving problems better for us, or more cheaply, or just more effective way. And then we're sharing that learning all across the organization, like we have done with the AI code, right? With Nixon and his team. We're looking at to make sure we've got the right mix of partners. So again, we have a phenomenal ecosystem, both in terms of kind of commercial partners as well as academic, but we need to keep looking, so who is going to be the next leader? How do we kind of go to market with them or look for complementary capability? Always having those types of conversations, looking out. Again, we're thinking about bringing all of those things together, the right technologies, the right people, the right process improvements to deliver better outcomes for our customers. That is, kind of fundamental.
Yeah. And it's key, like a key part of that, it sounds like you sort of touched on it within your response there, but it's around data and digital literacy, right?
Yeah, it's massive. It is absolutely massive. And look, it's a challenge for every organization of every size, but it is a challenge for us as well. Right? So take an organization as large as BAE Systems, expecting everyone to just understand a complex topic, particularly an emerging concept, within 6 or 12 months is a tall order. And I think, what we've done is we've prioritized, the types of training we need to deliver, the types of people that will benefit from it. And then we've got this, so you kind of move from a very, very tactical, we must respond to this and get the right people trained, to a more strategic, this is how we will then train future talent as we move forwards. And again, this is quite specific to something that's caught many organizations off guard. But yeah, as I say, we're making sure the right people in the right parts of the business are receiving what they need. The other thing to call out though, because I don't want to knock this, the absolute curiosity and kind of, and sort of industrious our people are, you will find pockets of people who are just so interested in these things and they become homegrown experts in their own right. And you've got to find them. You've got to make it easy for other people to find them, and then you build that community. And that kind of richness in, as we've found through using the AI code and building this sort of web of really clever SMEs, all across the organization. But back to being data driven, because I think that's a nice one. That's something we both really care about. If you know your communities, you know their role and grade mix, you know the types of work they've been involved in, most stuff they're planned to be on, as well as all the things they've delivered for us so far, then, you can systematically start to put the right training together, right? So it's easy to say we're going to do an AI 101 and get everyone up to a foundation level, and you should, because that, clearly that helps demystify concepts and make sure we're all speaking the same language. This is a brand new taxonomy for us to trip over. But yeah, I'm kind of keen that we can all communicate more effectively as a starting point on these technologies.
Yeah. And building on what you were saying before, what do businesses need to be good at in order to deal with change? Because that's effectively what it is, right? It's change.
It's change. Disruption. Just not good enough just to be an agile organization then.
No.
I think if you can get there, that'll be pretty impressive. So there are some practical changes I think you can deploy. So you need to provide a mechanism that goes outside of your kind of traditional yearly funding processes to fund investigations, right? So that you can help people innovate locally where they are, where it makes sense. It can't all be massive change programs that are going to come and run for 2, 3, 4 years. That doesn't work. And I think where you've got these inspired teams that want to look at a new AI feature because they think it'll help their customer, it'll think it'll improve the way we operate as a business, or indeed just because they're really interested as professionals, we need to find ways of doing that where we don't kind of stymie them, right? The existing funding provision will not be sufficient. They won't have planned for this. This has come out of the blue. So my recommendation would be you've got to find ways of trialing capability. You need to make it easy for people. So we're doing this. Our CTO function within BAE Systems have spun up an accelerator program to help us do exactly that. It's dedicated funding. I know you've been a beneficiary of it. We've looked after loads of teams doing work with this particular pot of money, and it is helping us look at innovation across the board. So yeah, I mean, to kind of make that real, we're looking at our digital data delivery lifecycle, right? Specifically looking at how we can improve or transform elements of that using artificial intelligence. Another one that you'll nod along to, but you've got to ensure you've got quality data.
Yeah.
Shocker.
Yep.
Still true.
True.
Still true. So if you plan on training models, or even just deploying models that you picked up from Hugging Face or another, you need high quality data. So one of the things I like to say, maybe it's becoming a bit overused, but AI is a data pipeline, right? So we've always known good quality data leads to better insights. It's the same if you want to run and benefit from AI. Simple as that. Enabling infrastructure. So one that's going to become more of an issue for me now in my new role. So it's amazing how quickly, we can get held up by not having the right environments open to us, or access to the right networks, or we limit the ability for organizations to collaborate together. So you have to take those blockers down and quickly. It could be as simple as providing sandboxes. This might be an AWS or Azure environment, simple, working in, it could be in, the public internet, using those sorts of services to trial analogous concepts, but allow people to prove things quickly. And again, so this ties really nicely to that point before. Think about what you can prove quickly, right? All too often, and us as engineers can be really guilty of this. We try and plan the perfect proof of concept. It's the perfect use case with the perfect data, perfect models, perfect. It's not going to happen. It's proof of concept. It's not going to happen. So we need to be realistic and think to ourselves, what can we actually demo? That might help us then get to that next level of investment, build that business case internally, or trial something that we can show with the customer that feels like pretty safe and easy to trial. So consider low fidelity experiments, right? This from the world of, UX even. We're producing wireframes.
Yeah.
Low fidelity wireframes go a long way before we spend a lot of time and money in producing a high fidelity wireframe. It's the same with these proof of concepts. So, I'd encourage teams to try analogous use cases, particularly where you can't trial specific customer challenge. And we see this with the customers we work with. Think about low side, think about accessing public cloud. And then the kind of final thing I guess I'll touch on here, Jess, is all related to two-speed governance. So as an organization, back to our point about being trusted to deliver as a mission partner, we have a really robust, rigorous assurance process. And it's fantastic for giving our customers what they need. But for trialing innovation, it can be a little cumbersome. And that will be true for all organizations. So one of the things you need to look at is what that lightweight, more flexible governance approach might be, where you're including all the right teams to as I say, to look at this new technology. And again, we've done exactly that. The AI code, so that's the center of domain expertise, I should have said. The AI code has provided us with that thin layer of governance, but it's involved all the right teams. Like any good project, involve the right teams early and often. We have security, data privacy, legal, commercial. Everyone is in the mix and they get to hear and see and raise concerns, but we move more quickly as a group. I think those are the key things.
Do you think organisations could have been more prepared for ChatGPT? I mean, we've been talking about how AI has been around for ages, but it feels like ChatGPT kind of caught organisations by surprise, and now they're having to massively change and deal with that.
Yeah. So yes and no, I think is the honest answer. I think I mentioned it a few times about being an agile organisation. I think if you are a more agile organisation, you can be more resilient to resilience, the wrong word, more adaptive, more curious, more welcoming of change. The one thing in life that's true is change, right? It is the constant. So if we're always thinking that we're going to change, then it's not as stressful or awkward for the organisation to adopt. And I think you naturally become more welcoming of disruptive technology and just becomes part of your DNA. I'm just really mindful of everything not becoming big change programs. We see that with our customers, lengthy change programs that, their whole teams become fatigued by it. So that's one part of it. The no is because I've spoken to all of the leading market research organizations, and my mean question to them was exactly that. Did you predict generative AI and the impact it would have? And they waffled around it a little bit, as they might do. They all said, we were expecting something. Sure, not in November of 22. It's just, they weren't there. And just as a bit of a sidebar here, we've talked about it previously, but I was producing a futures report in that year, thinking about all the different emerging technologies that would impact actually our central government business at the time. And one of the kind of funny little thoughts I placed at the very back of the pack that just said, wouldn't it be scary if? And one of them was, developers could write code through accessing an AI model, right? And it was like, what that mean for the future of development? And 6 months later, we've got products in the market that do exactly that.
Yeah.
Surreal.
Wow. Obviously, you had some good foresight there.
It's lucky.
What other lessons have we learned along the way with this adoption and ChatGPT, et cetera, coming into the market space?
So if I look kind of externally in my interaction with the customers, the thing that I found most interesting is that they want to know about our internal lessons, failures, successes, but everything around how we've adopted it internally.
Yeah.
Which is frustrating when you turn up ready to talk about products. So, well, actually, here are all these products and services we're doing and they involve AI. That's great, Adrian, but actually, how are you getting on?
Yeah.
Right? That's what they really want to understand. They want to understand, are they in a similar place? A lot of the questions you kind of asked today, that's where they really want to be. So, that's caught me off guard a few times.
We can't talk about AI without talking about ethics. And you did touch on it briefly earlier when talking about generative AI coding assistants. But if we think more broadly, while we both could recognise that regulations and ethics are so important in ensuring new technologies are adopted safely across the board, the reality is that our adversaries are faster to adopt new technologies as ethics is, probably less of a hurdle for them. So the question is ethics getting in the way of adoption, and how can we find a balance?
It's such a great question. There is a TLDR here that is, yes, it does get in the way, but I think I'd like to think that's a good thing, right? So ethics is tricky and personal and cultural, right? It's so many different things, and getting it wrong with technologies like this, but they have such a big impact, can cause societal harm. So there's no getting away from that. It's also, it's all around us now. So I remember someone explained to me before that every human has bias, whether they know it or not, right? And therefore, anything that we do, build, create, offer, will have some bias in it. And if we're aware of it, then that's okay. But if we take something like biometric solutions, which again, were pretty much becoming ubiquitous, you interact with them everywhere, including at the borders on your way back. Biometric solutions, while they are trying, fundamentally are biased. And every biometrics leader in the world will tell you that there is bias in their model. And they're working very hard to address it. But the reality is, you can see why there would be people concerned about how ethical it is or not to implement that technology when there's known biases in it. So again, we talked about AI as a data pipeline, and quality and performance of a model is tied more or less one-to-one with the quality and volume of training data. Okay, so if you think that the most high quality and available training data for faces is largely from Western white demographics, naturally, when you're training those models, they're most performant on that segment. And it logically makes sense, but ethically feels all kinds of uncomfortable. And there are means to address this. Technically, there are means to address it. You can boost underrepresented populations using synthetic data. And that's pretty good. But I think the more ethical suppliers we're seeing are actually going out and looking to create brand new real data sets by going and actually interacting with those underrepresented segments. So one of the biometric suppliers we were talking to recently, they have photographers across Africa and Asia trying to make sure they've got represented data sets to then train their model. And I think that's incredible. It's a really good thing to be doing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We're starting to think about quantum. How can we apply lessons to technologies that are earlier on in their adoption phase, such as quantum?
Yeah, great question. It's the next big disruptor, right? Or not. It's difficult to say. Maybe it's a bit of both, which is definitely a superposition joke for the quantum fans. So we prepare for it in the same way. I mean, hopefully through this conversation, we've realized there's a number of things you do that aren't AI specific at all.
Yeah.
They're how an organization responds to disruptive change, right? Whether that's technology, the next new shiny method. I mean, Agile. Remember Agile? I mean, it caused all sorts of grief. So yeah, I think it's that. I think we're better prepared now. We've really tested out, kind of kicked the tires on these processes that we've adopted, like the code. We've smoothed off edges. I think as an organization, we feel far more in tune to respond to these challenges, would be my feeling. The Centre of Excellence concept works well. It provides that rapid governance, that thin layer. And we've got how you kind of restore some of that back into BAU working as well, which is really positive. It can't stay in that lightweight governance model. We need to then uplift the kind of core governance approach in sync with it. And we've done that. We have dedicated funding for AI. We expect to have dedicated funding for innovation in quantum. We're already building key relationships we have a large list of academic partners. They're growing to start to look at how we address quantum. We have a heritage in quantum, as you know, anyway. And then we've got people training on quantum concepts, right? So even though quantum computers are not readily available, there are emulators, in essence, within the cloud platforms that actually people can go and access. So one thing we didn't talk about, but just as a quick cover off, quantum is another fully loaded term. All right. So just for the sake of this conversation, we're talking about quantum computing, sensing, and communications.
Exactly as you were saying, we've taken the lessons that learned from AI and we're already implementing them for newer and emerging technologies such as quantum. What would you say are the boomers and doomers for quantum?
Love that. So, yeah. So interestingly, and this is one of those technologies where I'm really on the fence with. Usually I'm sort of all for technology in any shape or size, but I'm on the fence. And I think part of the reason for that is that lots of it still feels like science fiction rather than science fact. Yes, there are some examples that have existed for a long time, particularly in the sensing space. I've got a definition here for you. So quantum sensing, typically they can measure tiny changes to time, gravity, temperature, pressure, rotation, acceleration, frequency, electricity, and magnetic fields. All right, there you go. So, and they are used today in all sorts of things like MRIs, right, to help us image inside our fleshy bodies. But I found out recently as well, we're using them to detect whether a volcano is likely to erupt. So around Mount Etna, they've covered it in gravimeters, and they can then detect whether or not magma chambers are starting to fill, which I thought was really neat. So go and have a look at those. Again, we can provide a link to that article. But yeah, there are stacks of theories within quantum that there's little practical evidence to kind of back it up, and it's definitely not happening every day, but there are scientists in each camp about where these things go. So one of the quantum principles is around entanglement, which is quite interesting. It's kind of the concept that where you have two entangled quantum particles, what you do to one is experienced by the other, which I think is quite cool. So then you look at that from a sensing perspective and go, wow, this could be powerful. If I deploy an entangled particle in really remote regions, let's say deep in the sea, up in space, and I'm able to detect what happens to that with the particle that's sitting with me, well, two things. Those particles are probably impossible to detect. They're tiny. But if a submarine or an unidentifiable object in the sea or in space was to go past them, we'd be able to detect a change and pick that up remotely. So from a national security perspective or intelligence perspective, it could be extremely powerful, and that's why there's so much interest in it. But the science doesn't really support all that in the minute. The practical science doesn't support that. So yeah, I think just final thing in support of the doomers really, it's just hard to see how in 2025 and even up to 2030 where we're going to see the benefit of some of these quantum technologies. But, there's loads of excitement in the quantum space. I mean, quantum computing at the moment, a lot of the interest has been in breaking encryption, right? And we know we've looked at quantum readiness assessments for various different customers in central government already. We have quantum experts who are interested in this. But, if you look at what NCSC and NIST are saying, they don't believe symmetric cryptography is significantly at risk as long as you're rocking, 128-bit keys and above. And I would recommend people do, and go and have a look if you're not. This is a pretty sensible thing to get sorted. But yeah, assuming you've got those probably bare minimum around security requirements bottomed out, some of the hype around quantum is then a little bit diminished.
Yeah, it certainly feels like some of this is still written up in papers rather than, as you were saying, the more practical elements of it. So thinking along that then, what are the key questions that keep coming up in the conversations around quantum?
They're actually a lot like the ones that came up earlier in AI. But I feel like there are more pseudo AI experts that I speak to now than ever before, because there's just so much material and people can access it and play with it, right? They still can't access and play with quantum, even though elements of quantum sensing in particular have been around. There's accelerometers, reading, all those type of things that are in our devices today. You don't really play with them. They're really behind the scenes. So questions I get, what is it? Should I care? Will it make things faster? Is it going to be really expensive? Why is it that in the coldest places on Earth? Will it ever be reliable? Good questions. And back to what we said, it all just still feels a little bit like a lab experiment. And no one can put the finger on when it's going to change. But then we didn't know when generative AI was going to turn up.
True.
Yeah, I think in particular, if we're talking about quantum computers, yeah, again, back to what is it? When is it going to make a difference to us? And at what point can we predict it being really valuable? So everything we've seen so far, particularly efforts from IBM and others, they're investing heavily in quantum compute capability, which is great. But at the moment, the number of qubits they can provide are very low. The kind of reliability of those qubits is very low. They're hugely expensive to create and run. The energy consumption is high, and. So we're a little way off. Sensing is here, though, as I've said, and the opportunities for that feel very real, feel a lot more kind of tangible. So if you take LiDAR, so light detection and ranging, and they exist on most of your mobile phones. Quick sidebar on that one. So the way LiDAR kind of, I suppose, works is that it'll create like almost like a point cloud of your face. So it's picking out all the features of your face. So when you do face unlock, it's not looking at a flat 2D image the camera picks up. It's mapping that 2D image to a 3D model of your face, right? That's quite cool. But what's even more cool is that you can download 3D scanning apps to your mobile phone, and then you can go and scan objects around the house. And if you wanted to, if you're so inclined, maybe I have, you can pull it into a modeling suite and then make edits to it, and then you can 3D print it. So there's some pretty cool stuff that you can do with technology we have today, which is built on quantum principles. But there are some advancements coming. So as we see these technologies move out of the lab, what they're predicting for LiDAR is that we're able to detect light that have come from round corners. So the ability to detect what's happening around a corner, I mean, clearly for intelligence customers, this could be incredible. So I'm excited about it. I just need to see more practical adoption.
Okay. And taking away these insights, how can new technologies be applied to business strategies?
Great question. I could have asked you that. This is your world. You love business strategy. Okay, so assuming that, again, we've ticked it off, it's really easy just to become an agile organization. So let's assume that we've nailed that. And you're an organization that's not only kind of willing, but actively looking to keep changing because you recognize that's the way to stay current. You understand the value you bring to your partners, to your customers, and to your own people, right? Then it should be relatively trivial to map where these new technologies come in and where they might disrupt you, right? So, we can make that real for us. If I'm talking about our software development lifecycle or our digital and data development lifecycle, really, I can look at every aspect of that. I know where we deliver value for our customers. I know where we're delivering value to the employees that deliver within it. And I can then start to apply AI to it and see where we might go quicker, where I can take the pain of writing boilerplate code away from people, where I can refine and produce far higher quality requirements, where I can automate the delivery of tests. You can see, where AI is just going to go and be additive, or even if we look at documentation, completely reframe how we manage that entire world. So we looked at documentation in detail, and our question was, why do we create software documentation in the first place? It's such a painful, laborious thing to do, and the people that create it aren't massive fans of writing words. They quite like writing code, and we want them to keep doing that. So how do I take some of that pain away and still deliver the value? Well, the value of the documentation is that I can onboard people into the team more quickly, or I can transition that onto a support team, for example. So what if I could provide them with a bot that they can interact with, really friendly, feels like it's very natural to interact with, and it has knowledge of all these things. So we did exactly that. We took a state-of-the-art model, we built it into an agentic framework, they're all the rage, and then we provided it with the tools to access Jira for requirements, to access a SharePoint with our documentation, and then to access our Git for our code repository. And then you ask it questions. So you can ask it things like, I'm a new user of this product and I want to be able to register another user. They'll go, yeah, sure, no problem. So here's the original requirement. Here's how you would go about doing it. It summarizes it and gives you a really nice detailed response of how you go and answer that. There is no playbook behind that. There is no developer documentation. It's inferred how to respond to that using other sources of data. And then you find really cool things like emerging capability, where we didn't design this into the product, but we asked the solution, I'm a developer and I've got to develop this new feature. How would you do it? And it gave a response, a really thorough, holistic response using, this is how you might want to capture your requirement. Here's how you might change the code, and showed us where in the code base to change it. And then also pointed at some of the design docs that would be impacted by the change. And that's incredible. And again, not designed, an emergent property of that solution. But yeah, so again, the point of that ramble was that if you understand your organization, the value you bring, then it's far easier to respond to change.
Are you saying then that if you have a limited understanding of business structures, that's going to inhibit your adoption of new technology?
Yeah, I think it's going to make it really hard. What you'll probably start to see will be symptoms of duplicate effort. So different teams, because you don't know how they fit together, they don't know who's responsible for different things. These are all obvious. Have a RACI, have a value stream documented, have your processes. If those things aren't clear, then you get duplicate effort. You might also then embark on experiments that aren't valuable because you don't know. How do you attribute value to it? And that's not to say that some experiments in their own right aren't useful. They can be, just through developing competencies and capability in people. It's not taking anything away from good experiments are useful to develop your talent, but for value to your business, you need to know those kind of basic constructs. Mm-hmm. However, there are things you can do with the right enablers, so environments, tools, licenses, etc., you'll still get some benefit, and you might find over time you get to the same place. It will take more time, effort, investment, because you won't be as efficient.
Mm-hmm. And from your point of view, what new technologies are coming through, or that you're excited about, or that do you consider that are emerging that we need to keep an eye out for?
It's interesting as well, because we've talked a lot about definitions on this podcast, but so I want to take my own view on emerging, and some of these will, maybe be baked into AI, but, this could be a whole podcast in its own right. But, I'm really interested in robotics and human machine teaming. I think that's a really exciting discipline because robotics has come on so far, and a lot of that buoyed on by the advancements in AI. I think what we can achieve together in partnership is going to be really, really exciting. And you're seeing organizations like Mercedes, clearly Elon is very interested in how robots and humans partner. And neuromorphic computers, again, a topic that's been around academically for decades. And these are computers that are inspired by the way our brains are structured. But, not the expert on that. Something I'm really keen to do more reading on. I think could be really disruptive. Disinformation security, there's a cool new term that feels very social media, doesn't it? It's going to be all over LinkedIn. But the idea is that you're protecting an organization from disinformation.
Yeah.
So right at the top of this chat, we were talking about, how my parents are convinced by some of these deepfakes that we might spot and go, yeah, they're deepfakes. But some are really quite sophisticated now. And, I've seen videos where I've gone, ooh, not sure. And just that not sure means that if enough people have seen it, there's going to be a population that were convinced. So that's disinformation, it's misinformation, and all those things can be damning to a country, to a nation, fundamentally. So within DCIT, we know they care. They have a counter disinformation unit, right? So the UK is taking this seriously, but I think organizations, other partners around the world will also start to recognize that this is a thing we need to care about. And then probably something that's more important to me personally, I think, is sustainable technology, in particular within AI. So if you look at, the news recently is Sam Altman, desperate of OpenAI fame, desperate to build the next monster data centers because, the future of frontier models in his eyes is bigger, faster, more compute, more compute, right? Just racks of extremely expensive GPUs. Well, the one thing they all really need, energy, lots of it. So I kind of look at that and go, we all talk about sustainability, but it's taken a back seat in the world of AI. That's the reality of it. So, looking for models that can be deployed onto commodity hardware or, low consumption equipment, I think for me is going to be massive. So, yeah. Brilliant.
Thank you, Adrian. We'd be keen to hear from you listeners what emerging technologies you'd like to hear about. So do email in at poppodcast@baesystems.com. Thanks again, Adrian.
Cheers, Jess.
I'm Jess Ridout, and this has been The Power of Perspective.